Excited to be here today. As you all know, and as many members of our community know, I've been working on my PhD dissertation on compassionate cities and holistic frameworks. And I had the great honor and pleasure of interviewing the previous council. And so I'm here today to share my findings. We had this council retreat in March of this year, and one of the things that was on the agenda that we decided was something to discuss further was the research findings and also about the possibility of becoming a compassionate city. And for that, we're going to jump in. And I want to, oh no, that's fast, hold on, sorry. Okay, so quickly what we're going to do, and I want to give you the story. I want to give you a little bit of the background on this and why it's valid. But I'm also going to invite you into a quick video, maybe not that quick, 6 minutes, of the Compassionate Cities movement. So you understand from where I'm coming. And just again, for transparency, I worked for about 2 years. I've been working for about 2 years with the Charter of Compassion on a volunteer basis, working to help create compassionate cities, and now we're working towards creating a compassionate state, the state of California, which would potentially, or will be, the first state in the nation to be a compassionate state. So what we're going to see a little bit about compassionate cities. I'm going to tell you about my research questions, and then the context of the research, and then some more about the research questions, and then how I came to my findings. I'm going to try and go through that quickly because what's really interesting is the actual findings, and then if you want to explore this possibility further.
Today, we're excited to be celebrating what is arguably the greatest idea humanity has ever had.
I wish that you would help with the creation, launch, and propagation of a Charter for Compassion.
That wish was granted, sparking a global movement of compassionate action in a polarized world. Now, a decade later, the Charter for Compassion wants to share best practices from model compassionate cities to create lasting social change.
Many of our inner cities are in turmoil. People are looking for a solution, and compassion is the solution.
I think it's really important for the mission of compassionate cities to be spread across the world, particularly now because we know the turbulent times that we live in.
Cross-learning between compassionate cities like San Antonio, Monterey and Las Vegas has been a key to delivering remarkable results. One initiative from a group of godmothers in Compassionate City Monterey is rebuilding lives, one roof at a time.
So Las Vegas has its dark side, as any city does. Behind those images, there is a very compassionate heart.
Life on the street can be brutal, and so if you're always in survival mode, we offer a place of safety and a place of respite where people can come, be safe, decompress, and then start moving towards their next steps.
Really, when I think of our corridor of hope, I think of outstretched arms ready to embrace.
Across town, a volunteer-driven medical clinic heals the uninsured, while a food bank feeds the hungry.
I used to be part of that vulnerable population that we serve. I went without health care. I was homeless for a long time. Compassion heals. Compassion empowers. Compassion changes lives. I'm a direct result of that.
The city has also struck an innovative partnership between police and pastors to reduce violent crime.
After a violent event, say a homicide or a shooting, we will call our faith-based partners. They will come out and respond as a kind of a conduit to us to really preach no retaliation, provide aid and comfort to the family.
The first year that we started this model, we saw a 40% reduction in murders and a 56% reduction in shootings. Compassion is truly the key component to save lives, bring down gang violence, and the suffering that's in our inner city.
Y el intercambio de políticas públicas que nos hayan sido efectivos tanto allá como en nuestra ciudad, creo que es muy importante para poder fortalecer más este trabajo de ciudades compassionates.
Through the spread of Compassionate Cities initiatives, innovation blossoms and people flourish.
So it's a powerful way to unleash 5 things: inspiration, initiative, integration, innovation, and impact.
Compassion is the antidote to suffering, period. It's what allows people to have hope that there's a better day tomorrow.
Invertir en la compasión en este momento de la historia es invertir en la sanación del planeta.
In order to infuse and really expand compassion across our world or across our communities, we need more people to reach in their pockets and realize that it's going to have a ripple effect across the world and make it a better place.
The Charter for Compassion has a new wish for the next 10 years: to shine a light on compassionate cities whose measurable results inspire others around the world. You can help. Invest in compassion and cross-learning between communities.
If we aren't, as individuals, as organizations, as cities, as communities, investing in that for our future generations, we are so missing the mark. This is the best stuff that's happening on the planet.
Okay, so I wanted to share that with you because it gives an overview about this kind of work, and that there are a number of cities and actually countries around the world cities around the world that are embarking on this. So this kind of work, there are over 430 cities across the world and 54 countries that are already embarking on becoming a compassionate city. But when I moved to Marina, one of the things that was very clear is we have so many of these kind of components. That we have over, I think, 94 not-for-profits that are doing public outreach in our city, and we have, everything is care-based in so many ways. And really, where I'm hoping that we can go with this is to create a framework so that we can draw from the 3 holistic frameworks that I'm about to talk about and move forward. So my overarching research question was, what are the challenges and opportunities that city leaders experience in initiating change in the city of Marina, and what's the role of holistic city frameworks in their visioning and planning of the city? So again, very quickly, we all know our city, City of Marina, 22,000, tremendous diversity. And one of the issues, though, here that we're facing are many issues of economic, environmental, and social justice. And we see that through fora, through our development issues, through our possible gentrification or gentrification with displacement. And then we have positive things too, but that may have other ramifications. So for example, Joby Aviation, which is going to hopefully be coming here in Marina. Then we also have to be looking at protecting our geographical assets, and working with our urban growth boundary, our national parks, the ocean, CSUMB, and of course we're in our situation with Cal-Am, which is a drain on financial resources, but also there's information that suggests that it's possible stealing of the groundwater. Anyway, moving forward though, as I thought of then again about our city, and I thought, what are the challenges that leaders face in our city, and what are the opportunities that they see for the city of Marina? And more importantly, how are care and compassion for our citizens reflected in their visions for the city? or do the characteristics of the compassionate and or healthy city movements or the sustainable development goals contribute to their thinking of city's future? And then how do city leaders balance the social benefits of care and compassion from compassionate city framework with fiscal responsibility? So, talking now a little bit about holistic city frameworks. Holistic city frameworks actually came to be birthed, if you will, in 1972 through the Gross National Happiness, which was created by the country of Bhutan. I've chosen in my research not to look particularly at that model because the way that they got to it was through ethnic cleansing. And so I have some issues with that. But they did start the conversation about the role of compassion and care as a new way of looking at the well-being of a country or nation or cities. So in 1986, the Healthy Cities were established by the World Health Organization. The World Health Organization is, as many of you may know, an international organization that is looking at how to keep people healthy, and then also at the relationship within our communities. What does a community need to do to keep its population healthy, especially when we have a rise of depression and suicide? And then in 2010, the Compassionate Cities was established. You just saw a video about that. It came from Karen Armstrong's work in her 2008 TED Talk, where she was looking at the world's religions and saw that compassion was the overarching theme and thought, what would the world be like if we had cities rooted in compassion? And then in 2015 was the Sustainable Development Goals established by the United Nations. And these, again, are looking at how do we alleviate suffering. And again, here's a visual of it. Again, sort of gross national happiness being the initiation of this conversation, and other things. So, a little bit more about the Charter of Compassion. So, Charter of Compassion is generally a from-the-ground-up approach. It's usually initiated at the grassroots level, and it involves all stakeholders of the community, and then it's usually brought to the leadership in order to become a compassionate city. What I'm talking about for us and thinking about for us is a little bit different. It's going to be both a top-up and bottom-down approach. But again, we'll get to that in a minute. And next again, the Healthy Cities, which is unlike the Compassionate Cities. The Healthy Cities is more of a top-down. It's again governments reaching out, making the decision that they want to focus on health, reaching out to local not-for-profits, organizations, and individuals to create more of a healthier environment. And generally, like I said, it's the leadership of the city or community to choose to focus on health through policy and getting buy-in from other stakeholders. So too is it with the Sustainable Development Goals. There are a total of 17, and I don't know how clearly you can see it on the screen, but basically they're focusing on everything from mitigating and having no poverty, to care of water, to building sustainable cities, to gender equality, climate action, etc. And what's interesting then, what I was looking at in each of these city frameworks is where they come together and where is the overlap, because each one of them has specific criteria that they're looking at. So the Charter for Compassion has 12 centers that they're looking at. The World Health Organization has a whole list of criteria that they were looking at for defining health. So I was interested in where do these three come together and how are they applicable for us. So they come together based on 6 of the Sustainable Development Goals: good health and well-being, clean water sanitation, sustainable cities and communities, climate action, peace, justice, and strong institutions, and partnerships for the goals. Now, what I did when I started my interviews was I had open-ended questions, which I'll get to in a second, and coded them or looked at them through the lenses of these 6 goals. I'm not going to bore you with reading through this particular chart, but what it is it's a description of how each of the holistic cities, what area draws from and how they're interconnected. So, once I understood where they all came together, we did 3 phases of the study. The first was interviews with city leadership. And I interviewed the 5 members of City Council, which included the mayor, and also Mayor Pro Tem Morton, and Council Member Michael O'Connell. And City Manager, Long, community development leader, Fred Iyer, and 2 senior city planners, Christy Hopper, right, Hopper, and David Mack. Then in phase 2, based on the findings from phase 1, I did a community survey, which many of you may have participated in, and it was sent out to appointed city leaders and commissioners, community organizers and activists, spiritual and religious leaders, and not-for-profit leaders. Then I was also looking at phase 3, which was looking at all of the public information, the newspapers, the city council and other public agencies' agenda, and social media. Again, just looking to see in all of these information, are these 6 SDGs applicable? And sure enough, so this is, again, you'll see in your packet, I'm not going to read through all of them, but the questions that were asked of the council members, which really laid the foundation for all other areas of this research. And basically, as you'll see, is they're open-ended questions. Like, what will Marina look like in 30 years? Like, how do you envision it? What do you hope for the city? And then, what kind of economy do you envision Marina being built on? Or what are the biggest challenges Marina faces today? These were all questions about the future of the city. Following that were questions pertaining to leadership and community. How do you think long-lasting, effective change is best initiated? From the ground up, right? Citizens working together for specific goals, or top-down, policy, and then implementing. And then, what other influences, external influences affect your decision-making? And then also other influences, like what kind of social media do you engage with? Okay, so after reading through, after doing all the interviews, here is a list of the findings. So, it's put in here in a table format, so you can see that the priorities, first and foremost, were around sustainable cities and communities, and then good health and well-being, partnerships for the goals, and peace, justice, and strong institutions, clean water and sanitation, and climate action. I want to be really clear, though, that these names are just representative of the themes which were being discussed, because in the healthy cities it looks a little different, and in the compassionate cities it looks a little different. So once all of the interviews were looked for if these themes were there, they were gone through a second time to see what kind of themes emerged, what other things were important to our city leaders, and that's the emergent themes. So again, I've just put it in a little bit more ranked order. Same thing, exact same information, just put so that you can visualize the priority themes. Again, another visual, and now we're focusing just on the 6, not going into the emergent themes at the moment. So for the sustainable cities and communities, what we were talking about and what arose through the interviews was that we were talking about better planning. So the use of zoning, general plan and general plan development. We were talking about housing and sanitation, affordable housing, affordable by design housing, police, fire, or any aspect of public safety, urban planning that was prioritized to increase access to safe transport systems, green and public spaces, and emergency responses to natural disasters. The second priority was good health and well-being. And this was talking again about people's overall theme of what does it take to be healthy in our community? And how are issues of exercise and mental, emotional, spiritual components of humans' lives incorporated? What does it look like, and what do we do to support those things? So the development of parks or recreational trails. Is this good? Any questions for her, or are we good?
Okay.
We're good? Okay.
Yeah, I have questions, but I'll hold them until you're all done.
Okay, great. Third priority was partnership for the goals. And again, we took this a little bit more loosely to make it more applicable for our city. So partnerships around governments, NGO, public communities, schools and universities, multi-stakeholder engagement, county, regional solutions are also included in this category. I want to just say one thing about this, though. So when you look at a lot of these holistic frameworks, at least I look at it from a very optimistic perspective. And I love the idea of partnership and collaboration. But there is a shadow side which should be addressed because, for example, something like Fora, where we're always in opportunities to grow, we could say, arises, and there's some challenges there. So it's bumpy, and I think that that's an important thing to keep in mind when we talk about partnerships. Partnerships, as we move forward, as we develop as a city, it gets messy, really messy sometimes. The fourth priority was focused on peace and inclusion, or we could say inclusion and diversity, which is an extremely important thing for our city in particular, because we're looking about citizen activism, not-for-profits working for change in the city, ensuring access for all, including the marginalized and displaced members. And that's not just talking about the issues of like homelessness and things, although that is definitely part of it. It's also talking when we move forward as a city, as our housing costs go up, as our cost of living goes up. What about the people who have been here for so long that can no longer afford to live here? This is actually one of the more, for me, personally disturbing and uncomfortable parts of this research. It's just how many people are in our city are having to leave or are suffering because they can't afford to live here anymore. So when we talk about gentrification and people being displaced, I think this is a really important one to look at, as well as also issues of racism, which is another issue that we have to deal with in our city. Okay, fifth priority, clean water and sanitation. And so if this was mentioned, it was in the context of urbanization, promising efficiencies and better infrastructure and technology, and that could include the role of technology in planning for the future, like Joby Aviation. It could also include infrastructure, so increased access to safe drinking water and improved sanitation for large segments of population, proper waste disposal. It also includes roads, bike paths, sewage, power lines, waste management, and of course mentioning of public works, road improvements, water and environmental safety. Lastly, climate action was the last one of the priorities. And so this is looking at the extreme weather events and whether or not they bear significant issues on health and by disrupting food supply chains or spreading waterborne illness or causing uprooting and migration and resulting in physical injuries. Or it could be an aim to reduce carbon emissions, thereby improving air quality and promoting physical activity by replacing cars with walking and cycling. And then of course, it's not to mention bike paths or biking to work or walking trails, or the increase in public transportation, and anything that really works to mitigate a negative impact on the environment. And this can also, with mention with anything about CEQA, this was also included in that, because the purpose of CEQA is to address these issues. I think it's important to mention that for the fifth and sixth priority of clean water and sanitation, that even though those were ranked lower, they were sort of assumed in all of the conversations, because I feel fortunate that we had, and I think we still do have, if not even more so now, a council that is really keeping these issues in mind. So, what does this all mean? Well, I have a dear friend of mine and colleague who said, let the compass, which is in compassion, let the compass be compassion, let the compass be compassion to guide us into the best direction. I said that backwards, but you got the gist. Anyway, the compass is in compassion. Okay. Anyway, so what do we want to do? How do we move forward if this is something of interest to us? Basically, there's a two-pronged approach, we can say. It's the top-down and bottom-up. Top-down meaning from leadership and policy and agenda setting, and then bottom-up meaning community priorities and community engagement. If we were to look at the city leadership, for us it would mean policy and agenda items are seen through the lens of compassion, and then policy and agenda items that reflect the community's priorities. And then the other part of how to move forward is through the community meeting. And then the four circles on the side are related to the Charter for Compassion's sort of 4 steps for assessing a community, and that's usually done through the community engagement. It's the first thing is you discover and assess, you focus and commit on whatever your priorities are, you evaluate, oh sorry, I started backwards. You evaluate, no, I got it right, sorry. Discover and assess, focus and commit, and then build and launch the priorities, and then evaluate and sustain. Okay, so So again, now when we look at the role of leadership in becoming a compassionate city, one example is again looking at agenda items or issue or project through the lens of compassion. So that would be asking questions such as, what's the most compassionate way to address this issue? Are we being inclusive? Who's being marginalized? In what way does this agenda or policy item affect residents for the good? In what ways does it affect people negatively? In what way could we do it better with more compassion or more care? What are we missing when we look at this agenda item or policy? Who are we leaving out? And then, what does compassionate budgeting look like? What if we looked at our budget through the lens of compassion? And then, again, looking at compassion, what that really means is going to the places in the community where there's the greatest suffering and looking to alleviate that issue. And so, what does that look like when we budget? And then how do we prioritize our goals in keeping city leaders' visions and compassion in mind? And when I'm talking about city leaders' visions, I'm referring to the 6 SDGs. Okay, and then if one can decide that the community, while council and city leadership is looking through that lens, then the community gets involved again in this 4-step process, and it begins first with a series of community gatherings. And if this is of interest to council, to just continue to explore this as a possibility, I would begin the first meeting the end of summer, early fall. So what does that also mean if we were to move forward? So this would mean that city leaders would work with reframing and day-to-day activities, and then at our next retreat next year, we would receive the community's priorities, and we would focus and integrate the community priorities into the budget and goals. So we're really representing our people, which is really our job. And then, of course, we would affirm the charter, and the charter is also, there's a separate handout out here so you can understand what it is. I don't know how we're doing on time, but actually, can I have 4 volunteers? Want to read that first paragraph, please?
The principle of compassion lies at the heart of all religions, ethical and spiritual traditions, calling us always to treat all others as we wish to be treated ourselves. Compassion impels us to work tirelessly to alleviate the suffering of our fellow creatures, to dethrone ourselves from the center of our world and put another there, and to honor the inviolable sanctity of every single human being, treating everybody without exception with absolute justice, equity, and respect.
Another person? Elizabeth, can I call on you?
It is also necessary in both public and private life to refrain consistently and empathetically from inflicting pain, to act or speak violently out of spite, chauvinism, or self-interest, to impoverish, exploit, or deny basic rights to anybody, and to incite hatred by denigrating others, even our enemies. It is a denial of our common humanity, the knowledge that we have failed to live compassionately, and that some have even increased the sum of human misery in the name of religion.
Another person?
We therefore call upon all men and women to restore compassion to the center of morality and religion, to return to the ancient principle that any interpretation of Scripture that breeds violence, hatred, or disdain is illegitimate, to ensure that youth are given accurate and respectful information about other traditions, religions, and cultures, to encourage a positive appreciation of cultural and religious diversity, and to cultivate an informed empathy with the suffering of all human beings, even those regarded as enemies.
Last person?
We urgently need to make compassion a clear, luminous, and dynamic force in our polarized world, rooted in a principle of determination to transcend selfishness. Compassion can break down political, dogmatic, ideological, and religious boundaries. Born of our deep interdependence, compassion is essential to human relationships and to fulfill humanity. It is the path to enlightenment and indispensable to the creation of a just economy and a peaceful global community.
So it's kind of a tall order. It's very beautiful. And I believe our city is primed to take this kind of challenge on, because we already have so many of the characteristics here, more or less. And some days more, some days less. Before I finish off with this quote, I think too, there's another interesting component of this, and this is one of the things that we've struggled with as a city, is our economic basis. Not just for our citizens, but as a city, that we need to create more revenue. And so by engaging with these kind of frameworks and by starting to classify the works that we do in relationship to the Sustainable Development Goals, there's a lot of grants out there. There's a lot of capabilities and possibilities to engage other people and other organizations to literally buy into supporting our work. I think too that one of the best things about Marina is we are on this precipice of redefining the city. And that's really exciting, and we get to decide in what direction do we want it to go. And we already have the frameworks, and so I'd love for us to continue the conversation. And with that, I finish with a quote. When we're motivated by compassion and wisdom, the results of our actions benefit everyone, not just our individual selves or some immediate convenience. When we're able to recognize and forgive ignorant actions of the past, we gain strength to constructively solve the problems of the present. So with that, I will go straight into questions, comments, and discussion.
All right. I've always thought of sustainability to include a large...
Can you turn on my phone?
My mic?
Yeah.
My mic's on.
Oh, there you go.
But probably wasn't close enough. So I've always thought of sustainable as including as a primary focus, one of the primary foci, to be the non-human world. And this, maybe by design, is very human-centric. And when in the part you have volunteers read that first paragraph, to treat all others as we have to be treated, alleviate the suffering of our fellow creatures, dethrone ourselves from the center of our world, treating every single human being, treating everybody with equity, respect, and justice. And it seems like we're talking about people. And I understand that will, as people, that will always be our primary focus. But I thought it was notable that the presentation of sustainable cities and this sort of summary, it doesn't really refer to anything outside the human experience, except when it comes to clean water, and the inference is that that clean water is for us humans, and that's why we want it to be clean. So can you speak to sustainable cities perception about the non-human world?
Absolutely, that's a great question. So I'm going to start off with one premise. The Earth is alive, amazing, and incredible, and we treat her sometimes, many of us, not always as respectfully as she deserves. I mean, we've done more damage in the past 50,000 years of human evolution than has ever been done to the planet before. And so this idea is saying, well, if the humans get their stuff together, then, and we do it in relationship with the Earth, we might be able to sustain ourselves and the planet for longer. And when you look at the 17 Sustainable Development Goals, many of them are actually Earth-centered. I would say to you too, with the focus of climate change, that's about addressing the climate issues. That's about saying we have a crisis, how are we going to work with that? And so that's there, that's foundation to what we're working with. And when you look at the good health and well-being part of that is in relationship to nature. So there was mention of the trails, of a beautiful greenway and parks, so it's there. I think that historically the word sustainable has been associated with the environment, but it has also evolved over time to be how do we sustain our relationship as beings here on the planet. So that's how I interpret it. And to your point about what was read at the end, so those 4 paragraphs are actually from the Charter for Compassion. And if we go back to how the Charter for Compassion started, it started through Karen Armstrong's work, which was looking at the world's religions and looking at how do we find compassion. I mean, more destruction is done to the earth through war and violence than many other things. And so if we find compassion and weave that through, hopefully that will be included. So that's how I would best answer it. And again, I would also refer you to the other sustainable goals that are not part of the 6, that are talking about water. Hold on, let me find them for you. Sorry.
The emergent themes, or?
No, it would be slide 12, which is right up here. And now you're seeing my notes. So, let's see. So the United Nations, as you can see, why don't I make this larger since you can see what's in front of me.
Like, what's number 14 that has a fish on it?
Number 14 is life underwater. So that's talking about oceans and ocean care. And again, so the sustainable goals are much broader than what we focused on here. I was looking here at our city leadership and what is important to them and how does it go. And that doesn't mean that there's room to dance with it and to change it as well. But I would encourage you, I'll just quickly go through them. 17 goals. The challenges facing humanity: poverty, hunger, good health and well-being, quality education, gender equality, clean water and sanitation, affordable and clean energy, decent work and economic growth, industry, innovation, infrastructure, reduced inequities, sustainable cities and communities, responsible consumption and production, climate action, life below water, life on land, peace, justice, strong institutions, and partnerships for the goals. So what that really is saying we have an earth that has to be cared for, and these are the ways we need to do it.
So do we have it within our discretion to include things like preservation of the world's oceans, preservation of the world's forests?
Absolutely. I mean, that's inherent in the goals. Yeah.
So we could specifically mention new concepts or elements that aren't specifically mentioned.
Of course. So the way this works is that the city, like I said, the city looks at its priorities and figures out through the leadership side, then based upon what the community wants as well, and that can be part of the conversation. We're, even as council, we're still part of a community. And so when we would go to write our resolution about this, we can write it however we want and include it in whatever we want. With that said, it would probably be a joint discussion that would be written by the community and then brought to the city attorney to be sure that we got it right. Okay, other questions, comments?
Thank you. All right, Lisa, thank you very much. And thanks for all your hard work on this initiative.
All right, thank you very much.